Hello dear friends, let's talk about problems of Peugeot 207. The basis of the gasoline offering is the 1.4-liter TU engine, which also powered the previous 206 and more PSAs. He prefers calmer drivers. If at the turn of the millennium it belonged to a relatively fast aggregate for the 206 CU, in the heavier 207s the driving dynamics are noticeably weaker. In addition, the dynamics are down due to Euro 4th exhaust emission standards. In normal driving, the engine has an acceptable consumption of about 7 liters and solid reliability. There are occasional problems with the fuel system, which is manifested by the shutdown of the engine and the ignition of the engine failure light or a minor leakage of oil and coolant. The more dynamic engine is the 1.4 16V ET3 with 65 kilowatts at 5250 rpm and 133 Nm at 3250 rpm. The engine was upgraded in 2008 with variable valve timing VVT to provide 180 Nm, 90% of maximum, at 1800 rpm. In addition, the engine is not too devouring, and in normal driving consumption is about 7.5 liters. The 1.6-liter petrol has been available for fast driving since 2008. The engine has an output of 80 kilowatts at 5800 rpm and a torque of 147 Nm at 4000 rpm. If driven smartly, it will enjoy about 7 liters. Years of operation has shown solid reliability and durability of the engine. An interesting motorization is the modern 1.4 VTI created in collaboration with BMW. The 1.4 VTI EP3 8FS engine has variable intake and exhaust valve opening times, reaching a maximum power of 70 kilowatts at 6000 rpm and 136 Nm of torque at 4000 rpm. Up to about 2500 rpm, the engine is quite lethargic, but gradually revives, and over 4000 rpm gives a fast ride almost up to 7000 rpm. With a little effort, consumption can be maintained at about 6 and 6.5 liters of gasoline. Further cooperation with BMW led to further motorization, namely 1.6 VTI 120 and 1.6 THP 150 engines. The 1.6-liter VTI engine delivers 88 kilowatts at 6000 rpm and 160 Nm at 4250 rpm. However, 90% of maximum torque is available in the range of 2500 to 5750 rpm. The engine is refined, gives the vehicle a solid dynamic, is easy to choose, and has an average consumption of 6.5 liters. The 1.6 THP turbo engine does not contain a variable valve stroke, but it is equipped with direct fuel injection, which allows a relatively high compression ratio of 10.5 liters, 10.5 to 1. There is also a turbocharger with water cooling, and its pressure is electronically limited to 0.8 bars. This turbocharger makes better use of pulsations in the exhaust gases, because the exhaust gas from the first and fourth cylinder is discharged into the turbine separately from the second and third exhaust pipes. The turbo cooling circuit is supplemented by an electric pump which runs for some time even after the engine is switched off, thus cooling and protecting the turbocharger. The maximum power of the THP engine is 110 kilowatts, 115 kilowatts after modernization, at 5800 rpm. Torque reaches up to 240 Nm at 1400 to 4000 rpm, but 156 Nm is already available at 1000 rpm. Therefore, both engines may seem like a good choice in terms of drivability. Unfortunately, the name spoils the problematic reliability. The diesel range is based on the fourth cylinder 1.4 HDI with max, with a power of 50 kW and a torque of 160 Nm. The engine contains an aluminum alloy block and cylinder head. Driving dynamics satisfy kilometer drivers who prefer more economical driving. Consumption is about 4.5 liters in normal driving. More fuel, also noise, is required by the engine when driving on the highway, where shorter gears are adversely affected, which means that at around 130 km per hour, it spins around 3000 rpm at fifth speed. With regular service, it gives solid reliability. In the case of shorter runs, relatively quick warm-up of the engine to operating temperature thanks to its aluminum construction, which favors faster warm-ups in the winter month. For good reliability, it is important to replace engine oil after 15,000 kilometers and reduce the divorce interval by 240,000 kilometers to 160,000. A very good alternative in terms of driving and consumption are both 1.6 HDI engines. This unit is based on the smaller 1.4 HDI. The engines have an aluminum block and a cylinder head that includes 16 valves, less than 66 kilowatts at 4000 rpm and 215 Nm at 1750 rpm. More powerful 80 kilowatts at 4000 rpm and 240-260 Nm at 1750 rpm. The weaker version includes a turbocharger with fixed wind geometry, more powerful with variable geometry, and overboost function, increasing the charge pressure of the turbocharger and 20 Nm of torque. To meet the Euro 4 exhaust emissions standard, the more powerful version, 80 kW, is equipped with a FAP particulate filter. Especially the more powerful version features a very smooth drag from low speed and allows for fast driving. The handicap of a weaker engine compared to the more powerful version is generally felt when overtaking or accelerating at higher speeds. Consumption is on average about 5 liters of diesel. At first glance, it is an interesting engine that, however, can cause problems even at low mileage. Oil leaks through the valve cover gasket, which is usually resolved by resealing in the case of many kilometers, often up to 100,000 kilometers. Various mechanical disturbances can already occur in a much larger amount. The main reason for these problems is the early degradation of engine oil by diesel. There is also a poorly shaped oil pan, in which the drain screw is located above the bottom of the tub. In practice, such a solution allows the dirt to remain in the crankcase even when the oil changes. Thus, the new oil is quickly soiled with dirt and adversely affects the life of the various engine parts. The turbocharger usually strikes first. The sieve between the lubrication duct and the pipe does not allow sufficient lubrication of the turbocharger bearings. They overheat and thus accumulate additional soot deposits, greatly shortening their life. In order to remedy this problem, it is recommended to periodically clean or possibly replace parts, pipes, sieves, hoses. Dirty engine oil also affects other parts of the engine, so that clogged hydraulic valve lifters, crankshaft bearings, or progressively reduced compression can also occur. Other breakdowns that can occur at higher mileage include a faulty EGR valve, excessively worn injectors, poor start or noiser, and uneven engine operation. And there are often various oil leaks or problems with the vacuum circuit that controls the EGR valve, throttle valve, and turbine. With higher mileage, excessively worn floating flywheel also occurs, reflected by creaking, excessive idle vibration, also jerking when moving, or increased noise when accelerating from a lower speed. During 2010, depending on the market, some unit at the beginning of 2011, new 1.6 HDI V8 engines in versions of 68 kilowatts, 230 Nm, and 82 kilowatts, 270 Nm appeared on offer under the hood. The engine has been significantly redesigned, which has had a positive effect on significantly improving reliability. Engine performance parameters have been improved, but in practice, older 16-valve versions are somewhat more active at lower speeds, while newer 8-valve versions are more lively in the mid-range. Consumption is more affordable than in the 16-valve version. Similar to the older 16V, in the case of the 8V version, the lower power versions, 68 kilowatts, are without floating flywheel and include a simpler turbine without variable blades geometry. In practice, they are cheaper in the long run for possible repairs. In the case of the most powerful 8-valve 1.6 HDI 82 kW version, it is appropriate to mention a few words about the injection system in terms of durability and reliability. Unlike the lower versions, piezoelectric injectors, weaker with solenoid, are used in the stronger version, are very sensitive to fuel quality, and overall life and reliability are significantly worse than in the lower versions. In practice, there were instances where the injectors had already gone in a new vehicle with several thousand miles and had to be replaced. Mostly their lifespan is between 150 to 100,000 kilometers, and after that they require replacement. The gearboxes were originally a 5-speed manual and a 4-speed automatic for the 1.4 16V engine, but rarely, moreover, it is quite slow and lags in dynamics and also boosts fuel consumption by about 10-15%. 5-speed manual transmissions are pretty reliable. New 6-speed gearboxes reserved for more powerful models had made significant improvements, which the arrival of the upgraded 1.6 HDI, a new 6-speed automatic transmission has also emerged. Very rarely are vehicles with robotic gearboxes. 1.4 VTI, later 1.6 HDI 16.8 kilowatts. However, their operational characteristics negate several disadvantages. It is possible to mention less comfort or gear shifting, faster clutch wear, occasional service intervention, recalibration, and overall poor reliability that comes to light, especially in the case of more used cars. In terms of reliability, the small Peugeot does not work badly, especially compared to some models from the family from the transition to the new millennium, Peugeot 307, 607, and so on. However, bugs were found, especially regarding some engine versions. Many homeowners complain of frequently burned H7 bulbs in the headlights or a squeak in the interior when driving on bumps. Sometimes there is a problem with the connector, and if the bulb has burned out in the taillight, be prepared for a difficult replacement. The taillight must be removed. The rear door lock is responsible for excessive impact of the rear door when crossing bumps. The test drive should be careful about the power steering effect. Frequent replacement of the thermostat, whose replacement is not the cheapest. Usually the thermostat opens too early and the coolant is released into the radiator too early at 40-50 degrees. The vehicle is very well protected against corrosion, except for the exhaust pipe. The rear exhaust is not lasting, especially for vehicles on patrol. Often driven on short routes. In the early years, there were also buzzes in the fifth gear of the manual transmission, more often in combination with a 1.4 HDI engine. Often this error was eliminated in the warranty. In the case of a 1.4 55 kilowatts engine, oil leaks and sometimes coolant leaks occur at higher mileage. The throttle problem can also occur at higher miles, which usually reveals uneven engine operation and idle speed fluctuations. Applies to gasoline engines other than VTI and THP. Generally, lambda sensor failures sometimes occurs with gasoline engines, which is usually detected by the ignition of the engine failure lamp, increased fuel consumption. In the EP series of engines, 1.6 VTI and 1.6 THP, there is often a problem with the timing mechanism due to imperfect connection of the crankshaft and the gear until February 2010. This connection loosened over time and the tensioner gear caused the timing mechanism to loosen over time. The distribution itself is not very resistant and there is often a problem with hydraulic tensioner that function poorly. While the atmospheric VTI rarely at 1.4 VTI, the problems were fairly well eliminated and the chain distribution only had to be changed at higher towing, revised 2010. In the case of 1.6 THP, the chain resistance to torsional shocks is significantly worse and remains a weaker engine element. Gasoline engines VTI and THP can have a fault in the VVT variable valve mechanism, which in addition to starting the lamp, the engine malfunction is manifested by the engine shutting down, weaker thrust, or sudden acceleration. There is also a malfunction of the ignition coil, which is manifested by the operation of the engine on fewer cylinders, uneven driving, jerking, poor start, and so on. Early spark plug replacement helps prevent ignition coil failure. It is recommended after 50,000 kilometers at the latest. It is recommended to replace the spark plugs after 30,000 kilometers when driving more often on shorter routes around the city. If starting the engine is problematic, the camshaft position sensor may also be defective. Occasionally with the engine light on and usually with an increase in consumption, a faulty oxygen sensor has been reported. A higher risk if the vehicle is driven more frequently on shorter routes. As the number of kilometers increases, there are also oil leaks, more often in VTI, around the oil pump. At higher mileage applies to all engines. There is also a coolant leak. This leak is mainly caused by a leak-worn water pump. With 1.6 THP engines, excessive soot deposition occurs over time, especially in the intake tract and intake valves. The reason for this is the recirculation of exhaust gases, which contains soot particles as well as oil mist that penetrates to the intake system through the ventilation system of the crankcase, as well as around the piston rings, which are characterized by fine construction and low friction pressure for the lowest power loss. Such an oil mist then carbonizes and gives off soot. In addition to suction and intake valves, soot is also deposited in the combustion chamber. In addition to deposits on the intake valves, soot deposits in the combustion chamber cause the so-called detonative combustion. In fact, when the engine is running, it gradually heats up to a high temperature and causes self-ignition of injected fuel. The detonation sensor detects these events and sends an impulse to the control unit, which in turn reduces the ignition angle to prevent detonation. The fuel mixture later ignites and burns and does not transfer all this energy. As a result, less and less power, convulsive acceleration, as well as increased consumption, with a long-term detonating combustion problem. The piston bursts and the engine is damaged. As a precautionary measure, it is recommended to add cleaning agents to the fuel. In addition to cleaning, these additives also reduce surfaces adhesion and thus eliminate carbon deposition. However, it is important that these fuels or preparation are used regularly, preferably after each tank filling, but at least every third tank. Single or short terms use has no significant effect. With a heavily soiled engine, such a cleaning treatment has only short-term effect and often requires so-called cleaning treatment. Valve blasting with special tools without head disassembly in case of major damage and engine head replacement. Occasionally there is a problem with the faulty coolant temperature sensor on 1.6 THP engines, which causes the engine not to warm up to operating temperature. Sometimes the whole thermostat does not work together with the sensor. Occasionally electronic turbocharger control engine, which leads to a reduction in the engine power. It should be added that upgrading the engine to Euro 5 solved some of these shortcomings, but problems with the timing mechanism or excessive soot formation in the turbocharger version remain. For diesel engines, it is recommended to refuel with diesel and change the fuel filter regularly. The greater the number of impurities contained in diesel fuel, the fuel filter results in poor acceleration or loss of thrust at higher speeds. Of course, more impurities also pose a risk to the injectors, which can clog, resulting in a difficult start or malfunction of the engine. Often it will help to keep the injectors professionally clean, but sometimes cleaning does not help. Oil leaks from different engine parts can occur with more miles. Older 1.6 HDI 16V engines often have problems with the EGR valve. Oil leaks and various problems can caused by oil degradation, excessively worn turbine, clogged hydraulic valve lifters, gradual loss of compression, problems with crankshaft bearings, and the like. In the case of more powerful 1.6 HDI versions, the turbocharger pressure regulation of more powerful engines may fail. Weaker versions have much simpler bypass control and are therefore more reliable and cheaper to repair in the long run. On 1.6 HDI, older and upgraded version, due to inappropriate crankcase, it is advisable to change the oil frequently, maximum 15,000 kilometers, and from time to time to remove and clean the crankcase. Otherwise, the deposits that remain on the bottom will spit out new oil, which will adversely affect the wear of the engine and its components. Higher mileage on diesel engines can mean excessively worn injectors, resulting in uneven and noisier idling, worse cold start, poor performance or full power, diesel overflow, as well as a fall in safe driving mode. In practice, piezoelectric injectors used in 1.6 HDI 8V, 1.6 HDI 8V with 82 kilowatts power have a shorter lifespan and a slightly higher error rate. With higher mileage, you also need to pay attention to excessive idle vibrations, twitching when engaging the clutch when starting, then the most likely to blame is the excessively worn floating flywheel. In the case of diesel engines equipped with a particulate filter, FAP, depending on how the vehicle is used, about 200 to 250,000 kilometers. Sometimes the filter life is longer but sometimes shorter, especially if shorter urban routes are more frequent when the filter does not regenerate well. Filter problems are usually reported by the ignition switch moving the engine to safety mode. The approaching end clogging of a FAP filter is usually reported with an increased frequency of regeneration with a slight increase in consumption. It should also be borne in mind that the FAP filter needs a special additive for its operation, which is supplemented after about 80-100,000 kilometers. Of course, the condition of the engine injection system and the EGR valve also affects the life of the FAP. Peugeot 207 is a car that is far from ideal in terms of breakdown rates, but repair and service costs are not exaggerated. The average driver's wallet will withstand it as mistakes are usually easy to remove. In addition, despite its many minor flaws and frequent breakdowns, it rarely breaks down on the road and almost always delivers its passengers to their destination, as evidenced by ADAC statistics. The 207 is recommended mainly for its high level of safety and good ride comfort. But in the city, on the road, the car is comfortable to drive, provides enjoyment of a good finish and beautiful aesthetics. Don't forget to subscribe my channel, and if you're the owner of this car, then share your experience. It will help others to choose a car. Goodbye.